Text 51551. Today with Miriam on RTE Radio 1.
Now to next week's 48-hour strike action to be held on the 22nd and 23rd of August by directly employed Ryanair pilots based in Ireland who are members of the Irish Airline Pilots Association, otherwise known as IALPA. Mediation talks collapsed yesterday and Ryanair now claims the union has behaved in an extraordinary manner, asking for a 100% pay increase to salaries of $180,000 and seeming to be in some rush to get out on strike. The union, of course, rejects those claims, pointing to a 94% ballot in favour of strike action, and it says pilots have been forced into this position by the airline. Well, joining me now in studio is Angela Kirk, lead negotiator for the Forcer Trade Union, of which IALPA is a branch, and by Eoghan Corry, the editor of Travel Extra. Good morning to you both. Thank you both for joining us. First of all, Angela, look, let's hear a short clip of Eddie Wilson, Ryanair's chief people officer, speaking to Morning Ireland on this station earlier. He outlined the airline's position on this dispute.
We tabled our position yesterday, which is that there are a number of potential solutions on whether they want scales, whether they want pay increases over a 3, 4, 5 year process. We have come to a suite of different agreements with other unions throughout Europe. You can't just turn up, say we want 100%, pull down, say to the mediator, we're not continuing with this process and we're going to disrupt everyone's holidays next week and we're looking for 180, an increase of 100%. It's extraordinary.
Angela Kirk, what's your response to that?
I would reject what Eddie Wilson said this morning on Morning Ireland. It's just simply not the case, and it's certainly not the case for the vast majority of pilots that we represent. We have been engaged in a process under Kieran Mulvey, a highly respected mediator, the best in the business, over the last, in fact, for nearly 2 years now, since Ryanair recognised trade unions, and we've made some progress on other issues. However, on this particular matter, Forza, on behalf of IALPA and the Ryanair pilots, lodged a claim 4 months ago with the company. It relates to pay and to other issues. The factual position is that up to yesterday evening, and including yesterday evening, we never got a written response to the claim or indeed a counter proposal to the claim from the company, which from my perspective would be the fundamental basis of engagement.
So Angela,
in industrial
is it
action.
not the case then that Ryanair, as Eddie Wilson just said in that interview, tabled a position that there are a number of solutions, including pay increases over 3 or 4 or 5 years? Did they table such an offer to you?
Miriam, the position is that was verbally articulated to the unions on a number of occasions over the engagements with Mr Mulvey over the last number of months. We requested that the company put that in writing to us, and they failed to do that. And what happened yesterday was that a costing of our claim, a very brief costing, a piece of paper was handed across to us by the management side, which we would refute the accuracy of it, but that was the first piece of paper that was handed over from the company to us in relation to a response to the claim that we lodged 4 months ago.
So, Eoghan Corry, is this strike going ahead, or can you see any way out of it at this stage?
I don't see, from listening to what you've just played, and what I'd anticipate is IALPA's response. The key to this, Miriam, is the timing. We have the British pilots going on strike, so legally it was in IALPA's interest to get in and out of talks quickly with their strike threat and deliver it to have greater impact on Ryanair's schedule than they did last year, when they really had 3 days of strike action which didn't impact on Ryanair's operations. It's coming round again to have another shot at Ryanair. The question is, will a strike on the 22nd and 23rd in conjunction with their British colleagues have a greater impact on Ryanair's operations? I'm not sure they're strong enough at this stage to be able to deliver that.
In terms of the passengers, which is what our listeners care about, where is the passenger left in all of this, Eoghan, and what impact do you expect to see next week critically?
It depends on rostering. It depends on lots of things, how many IALPA members will support them on the day, but I'd expect expect a larger impact than last year. I mean, the maximum was 15 flights out of 130 on one of the days of the strike. I'd expect it to be not much larger, and I'd expect Ryanair to attempt, as they've done successfully in trade union disputes right across Europe, to fly through the dispute. But I'd also expect them to protect the holiday routes, because the message out of this from IALPA's point of view and their trade union, they're doing their way, is freaking out the passengers who are abroad at this stage. The communication channels from home not that clear. They're the ones who are going to get really stressed by the threat of the strike action, and that's basically the target of this action. So what I would expect Ryanair to do is protect those, and when there are cancellations, put them on the trunk routes, which are intercity routes, mainly London Stansted, and Stansted is the big base that BALPA operate out, striking on the same day.
Angela, back to the nitty-gritty. Eddie Wilson again, Ryanair's Chief People Officer, said your claim is for a 100% pay increase for pilots who are already earning $180,000 a year, and he said you've already got a 20% pay increase. Do you dispute those figures of his?
I do, and that's just simply not the case, and it's certainly not the case for the vast majority of pilots that we represent. The statement that Mr Wilson made in relation to the 101%, and that was referenced in a piece of paper that he handed to us yesterday afternoon. The issue of pilots' pay, everyone is aware that pilots in all airlines in every country, they're paid more than the average earnings, and the nature of pilots' pay recognises the responsibility that they carry and the training that they have to undertake. Now, can
I just be specific for a moment though, because he said three things there.
Yeah.
You're saying he's saying you're looking for a 100% pay increase. You're saying categorically you're not.
We're not.
Okay, you're not. Okay, wait. You're saying that pilots do earn €180,000 a year. You accept that?
Yes.
How many pilots?
There can be some. I haven't an exact number, because the salary for pilots vary from pilot to pilot depending on a number of issues, length of time in the airline and so on.
Okay, do you accept Eddie's other point that they've already got a 20% pay increase?
There was a pay increase agreed earlier in March of this year, but I would refute whether or not it was actually 20%.
So how much are the pilots, Angela, did you represent, directly employed by Ryanair? How much do they earn a year?
They can earn in the region, but as I said, it varies from pilot to pilot, because this is another element of our claim. There is no pay structure in Ryanair. There is no pay structure for pilots. Each pilot earns a salary based on experience, training, and a range of other issues. The big part
of most of them you represent earn about 180,000.
They do. Yeah, that would be fair to say.
They also say, Ryanair, that they've already brought in improvements on promotions, transfers, seniority and a pay increase, as Eddie Wilson said, of up to 20% for Irish pilots. They also say they enjoy a 5-on, 4-off roster, which is equivalent to a double bank holiday every week. Do you accept those step backs?
I accept that we have made progress with Ryanair since recognition on issues of base transfer, seniority and other issues.
So what do you want?
What we want is for the company to genuinely sit down and meaningfully sit down with the union to either respond to our pay claim, which they haven't done, apart from...
And what is your pay claim?
The pay claim, as I said, is a 30-page document that went into them in March.
But simply, Andrew, for my listeners, what is it? Because they've just been listening to the 20% increase. They earn about 180,000. What in figures are you looking for?
It is not a simple exercise, Miriam, of just saying... it's a 5% or it's a 10%. As I have said, there are complexities around the construct of pilots' pay. And what we are simply seeking is to achieve pay levels and structures on pay that are in line with sectoral norms across the commercial airlines.
Eoghan, Corry, can you put this, I suppose, in the context of Ryanair's wider HR difficulties, I suppose, across Europe? Will this encourage cabin crew, for example, to heighten their dispute with the airline? And comparatively, because you would know this, the Ryanair pilots that Angela is talking about Are they doing worse off than other pilots around the globe?
What Ryanair will bring to a negotiation is they'll compare them with the lowest, with someone like Jet2 who aren't earning a lot. What IALPA will bring to the table is we'll compare it with complex agreements like Lufthansa or Air France, where there's transatlantic captains. It's not a question that there's a difficulty comparing apples with oranges. There's actually green apples versus red apples, and it's a very complex across what pilots' pay scales are. I'm not sure it's true that Angela says there's no pay structure, because Ryanair have 4,500, 5,000 pilots across Europe in 17 different markets. They know what they're doing when they set up their pay. Ryanair pilots, though, to answer your question, are better paid than the equivalent. But as I say, the comparison is so complicated that anyone can hold up what I just said and said, yes, but the reality is they have been good to pilots. One of the reasons they have been to hold on to them. There was a situation of 3 or 4 years when there was a bit of a run on Boeing pilots in Europe, and mainly because of the expansion in Norwegian. That expansion has come to a halt, and Ryanair are now in a situation where they've surplus pilots. So I suspect all of those things factored in. Everybody knows that Boeing pilots are in short demand worldwide, but most of the demand we're seeing now since the decline in Europe is in China. A lot of pilots like to stay in Europe.
But I suppose what most people listening will want to know, Eoghan, and they're not experts like you or Angela, like, do the Ryanair pilots at the moment, do they have a fair grievance?
They are well paid. I don't think they have a fair grievance. I think this is posturing. I think it's playing cards with passengers' holidays at the peak holiday period, in tandem with the BALPA's announcement of industrial action next week. It's really not fair to passengers. I know Ryanair are belligerent. IALPA have a history of extreme hostility between themselves and Ryanair, particularly when they weren't recognised. But these are passengers' holidays. Please stop playing games with them, and don't start telling people this morning that it's a complex 30-page agreement and that the mediator, Kieran Mulvey, is no longer up to the task. We need some sort of coming together. This is people's holidays, and people who earn far less than the Ryanair pilot spending a good proportion of their income on holidays at this time of the year.
Thank you, Miriam. Obviously, I regret any disruption to the travelling public in relation to this imminent dispute, but I need to just respond to a couple of the points made previously.
Whoa. Hold on, let's answer Owen's point.
Yeah.
This is completely unfair on passengers.
And as I say, I regret that that is the case. However, because of the intransigence of Ryanair through the mediation process that we are committed to as you say, with a highly respected mediator, the reality of the situation is that we have been in this process with our proposal for 4 months. We have sought a counter proposal from the company. We have not received that. From my perspective as an industrial relations practitioner, it is basic industrial relations. Where a claim is lodged and there are issues with that, a counter-claim would be put
Ryanair, Angela, will also say that the level of
company.
support for this strike action, despite obviously the 94% vote in favour, they're highlighting that less than half of Ryanair's Irish pilots are members of your union, and less than 60% of them participate in the ballot. So as far as they're concerned, it has no valid mandate.
I disagree with that. We recruit and organise directly employed Ryanair pilots. We are under the legislation, that is all we are legally obliged to recruit. So we have 180 pilots, directly employed Ryanair pilots, and over 90% of those voted in favour of industrial action.
But actually, is it a bit like committing hara-kiri? I mean, we know that a couple of weeks ago, Ryanair, Michael O'Leary said that they were going to have to get rid of a lot of pilots and cabin crew. So do they risk losing their own jobs at the moment? And did you go into talks yesterday, as Eddie Wilson claims, just to cut off the meeting before it had even begun?
Absolutely not, on your second point. We did not. We were invited in by Mr Mulvey and we accepted that, and we went in again with the view of engagement and seeking a counter-proposal. And we made it clear to the company when we told them that we were considering balloting, and the only thing that would avoid a ballot for industrial action would be if they put forward a meaningful counter-proposal to us. They knew that well in advance and they failed to do it.
Do you respect Kieran Mulvey to continue being the mediator in this?
I have over 20 years' experience, and on many occasions I've dealt with Kieran Mulvey, and I have the height of respect for Kieran Mulvey.
Eoghan, Corry, come back there.
It'd be lovely to see them back with Kieran Mulvey. It would, the union, the whole aviation industry has moved on, technology, everything has moved on. Some of the trade union practices are still behaving like they were in the 1970s, 1980s. The employment terms are quite different from when IALPA had its big standoffs in the 70s with Aer Lingus. What we'd love to see is the Forsa is a public service union. It's probably more used to dealing with public service, to evolve to deal with a very successful private sector company, one of the most successful in Europe. If Ryanair had been unionised many years ago, they would have gone bankrupt. They would not have survived. It's a very difficult, hostile environment out there, and we can't start looking for an airline which is operating right across Europe to start adhering to outdated trade union models and
Angela,
practices.
a question from one of our listeners. Paddy in Newbridge says, Miriam, if the union regrets the disruption to passengers, why don't they strike in October?
The decisions to strike were taken by IALPA in conjunction with the Ryanair pilots, and that is the decision made by the individuals affected by the failure of the company to
So basically these strikes
respond.
will be going ahead.
These
on the
strikes will be
22nd and
going
23rd.
ahead.
Eoghan, quick update on the flight disruption in Shannon this morning. What's happening?
No news until 11 o'clock, but the runway has still not been cleared. Inbound flights, they're diverting to Dublin, and Aer Lingus have cancelled Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh. Shannon will obviously try and protect their big outbound this morning. Philadelphia, there's 2 JFKs, and there's a Newark as well. The check-in has been suspended, though. The flight, for those listeners who didn't pick it up in the news bulletin, is an Omni Air 531 that came in from Oklahoma to Shannon about 2 hours late this morning. On takeoff, there was smoke seen from the landing gear, and it was brought back. Everybody brought off board, nobody in danger, but it's complicated, Miriam, by the fact that this is a US military charter aircraft, and obviously all sorts of security questions will start arising from this, and that impacts on our listeners in how quickly we get the airport open. The havoc, there are about 16, 17 flights in the first wave of Shannon which are in danger. Only a few of them have been officially cancelled, but to put this in context, that's more than IALPA's strike day last year caused people freaking out hearing there's a big strike coming. Don't fret. Ryanair will get you from where you started to where you go, because IALPA don't have the critical mass yet to create an impact.
I have to. I know you want to get back in.
I want to come back in there, if I may, just quickly, in relation to a point made.
Very quickly.
The IALPA and the Ryanair pilots would contend that it is not the antiquated behaviours of the trade union that has us in the position we're in. It's the inability of Ryanair, who are new to recognition and trade union engagement, who do not understand what's required to solve this
Thank you
dispute.
both very much for coming this morning.
Thank you very much, Miriam.